This magnificent building has been at the very heart of civic life in Lexington since 1900. Its magnificent dome is an enduring symbol of our city, strong and firmly at the core of Lexington spirit. For more than a century, the courthouse has been a witness as citizens spoke out on the issue of the day, gathered on the Courthouse Square to rally for women's suffrage, to mourn President Franklin Roosevelt, to read the Declaration of Independence, to sing Christmas carols, to watch a military troop parade, or enjoy a game of marbles. Well, we almost lost it, but the public spoke out, telling all of us who would listen that they wanted to save this rapidly declining building, and we listened. In 2015, members of the council voted to approve my plan to save the courthouse, using a public-private partnership to restore the building and give it new life. Now it's time for celebration as we rededicate the Lexington Historic Courthouse at Courthouse Square, a grand public space.
For 102 years, the people of Fayette County sought justice at the corner of Main and Upper Streets. When it opened, the newspaper of the day proclaimed it Lexington's new state-of-the-art Temple of Justice. It had one handsome courtroom with arched windows, stained glass, and an ornate ceiling. Between 1992 and 2002, former Supreme Court Justice Mary Noble practiced law and served as a judge in the Main Street Courthouse. But by the time she arrived, it was no longer state-of-the-art.
When it was built, I know that it was state-of-the-art, but by the time I got to it, it was getting a little tired, a little decrepit in some places, but we still loved it and we loved being there.
The modern courtroom didn't compare to the grandeur of the original.
And while it was small, and while it was a little tight, and while it got worse as the years went on, as the numbers of people coming to the courthouse condensed what you could do there, there was always this feeling about being there where people actually had to cooperate because space was tight. You had to be respectful of others, and you had to show appreciation for the courtesy that others gave you. It was a very great experience for a young lawyer and a young judicial person. And so after a time, you simply could not put all the waiting defendants in the holding cells. It became a dilemma. Where do you put them? Some of the judges brought them in, set them in the jury boxes. Other judges lined chairs up out in the hallways and set them in the chairs in the hallways. So if you were a litigant or a prosecutor or a defense attorney or the judge going to another courtroom, you'd have to make your way between the rows of prisoners sitting in the hallway.
The decision of whether or not to renovate the courthouse, with its prominent location in the very heart of Lexington, had been weighing on City Hall for many years. In his 2014 campaign for re-election, Mayor Jim Gray asked citizens for their thoughts about the building. The response was clear: save the building, restore it, and give it new life. The city hired Holly Wiedemann with AU Associates to manage the project.
And as time evolved, thanks to Mayor Gray, the vision really gelled because of the importance of this building as the nexus of downtown. It's even built in a way that has a north, south, west, and east, and it radiates its inclusion and its center focus of Lexington. So having been born here, and our family's department store right down the street, Purcell's, I passed this courthouse many times as a child growing up and throughout my life, and it's such an important building.
The mayor was interested in a public-private partnership, choosing to involve the private sector rather than go it alone with public dollars. The city used historic tax credits to bring in funding from the private sector. In the end, it was a 4-year, $32 million project. Work on the outside included cleaning the stone and renovating the copper-clad cupola and the weather vane. Inside, architects approached the project with a respect for history, but also with a touch of creativity that lends itself to today and the future. The most difficult challenges stemmed from a remodeling effort in the 1960s that closed the dome to the public.
You did not know what the inside of the tower or the dome looked like because there had been a renovation in the 60s that had created the fourth floor and had totally closed off all of that beautiful molding, the walk around up at the top, and the inside of the dome. That had been completely closed off, and frankly, by that time, no one even knew it was up there. As chief judge, the court administrator came to me one day and he said, "Judge Noble, I think you need to come up and take a look at this boiler." And I'm saying, I know so much about boilers. How can I help you, Donnie? "Oh, but I think you need to come up here and see this." So we went up a hidden flight of stairs, turned a corner, went up a little ladder, and all of a sudden it was like I was in underground Atlanta, because you were sitting there looking up at this gorgeous dome and all of these moldings and the arched walkway around the top of the dome tower, and you thought, my goodness, I didn't know this was here. And then you turned around, and in the middle of the space was this large elevator shaft and a big old industrial level boiler. I said, "Okay, Mr. Taylor, I see it. Now what do you want me to do about it?" He said, "Well, Judge Noble, I just thought you ought to know it's kind of running on bubblegum in a prayer." And he was right about that. All of the equipment, all of the support systems in that courthouse were, of course, as old as the courthouse almost, or at least from the 1960s renovation.
Our part was to come in and essentially gut the center part of the building, if you will, undo everything that was done in the 1960s and restore it to its original grandeur at the dome, and to add the openings in the floors and the stairwell at the ground floor. So early on in the demolition, we did uncover there was quite a bit of destruction in the 1960s renovation, and we uncovered several of the areas that the new renovation needed to address to make the building structurally sound. There was a column at the top that was in dire need. It's a wonder that the bell had not fallen through.
The structural aspects within the rotunda were challenging, to say the least, because of all the HVAC equipment that had been stored there. And the vents, the return air vents, where the windows had been filled in of the windows in the cupola and the rotunda. So all of that, when we removed it, it was beautiful to behold. And the fact that that is now a light-filled, gorgeous crowning of this beautiful building that is restored to its original glory is pretty exciting.
When the dome reopened in February 2018, it had been out of the public sight for 58 years. Visitors to the building today can once again stand on the ground floor and look up to the lights in the dome, now through glass floors. As the renovation progressed, the building revealed wonderful secrets. There were faces everywhere carved into the stone or created in plaster, including some hidden in recesses in the dome. Practice for the Masons.
You know, the faces on the building are truly a mystery, the solution to which is no doubt lost in time. But there's been a lot of speculation about them. Who are these people? Why were they placed there? And I don't think anybody has ever found any accurate data about these carvings. But for me, the way I always viewed those faces on the building is it marked it as the people's building. You had people all over that building, always. It was the people's building. So how wonderful it is now that it can be used as a people's building for the whole good of Fayette County. It seems to me to be the perfect use of that building with all those faces.
And the work exposed some of the original load-bearing brickwork, including handsome arches that support the dome. The brickwork was done by Tandy & Bird, a large masonry firm owned and operated by Henry A. Tandy and Alfred Bird, both prominent African Americans in Lexington. Our town square, including the courthouse and Cheapside, has always been space owned by the public. The area, once bordered by public streets on 4 sides, was set aside by Lexington's trustees in 1780 as public space for a market and a courthouse.
So we have a rich history And it evolves around our town, our community, our public space, Cheapside, and the courthouse. And I go back to this all the time. It's the public space. No one individual ever owned any piece of our public space. They had buildings and businesses around them that people owned. But nobody can produce a deed that says, I own this little corner of Cheapside.
Trustees established the market because they realized the public needed a space in town where they could bring livestock, produce, anything they had to sell, including the enslaved. Lexington was a prominent slave market in the South because so many slave dealers were based here.
We had 24 slave dealers. Again, J. Winston Coleman, in his book, documented, he actually listed all of the slave dealers that were operating in and around Lexington. We had probably 6 jails, and that was where they held the enslaved. Within the downtown core,
the Cheapside slave sales took place utilizing an auction block located near Main Street in the vicinity of the space a statue of John Breckinridge recently stood. Breckinridge was a Confederate general who had previously served as Vice President of the United States and then Confederate Secretary of War. Breckinridge and fellow Confederate General John Hunt Morgan, whose statue was located in front of the courthouse near the corner of Main and Upper Streets, both owned slaves. The Breckinridge statue stood on Cheapside for 130 years. Morgan, on horseback, sat on the courthouse front lawn for 106 years. Erected after the Civil War, many now see both statues as symbols of an attempt at revisionist history by groups hoping to glorify the Confederacy. But then came October 17, 2017, when both statues were moved, first to storage and then on July 24, 2018, to a permanent home in the Lexington Cemetery. The city relocated the statues after a long public debate. Over the course of 18 months, DeBraun Thomas, a young musician from California whose family has roots in Lexington, and a group called Take Back Cheapside patiently and persistently convinced the city that it was not right to honor 2 men who fought to keep slavery on the same ground where so many slaves were sold.
But from the first meeting that we had with the city, and we learned the road that it was going to take to have those statues relocated, that was when I really started to believe that this can happen, because I can see it. So I think it's really, really great, and it's something that we as a city should be proud of, and that this was something that happened because of the power of people, and it also happened because our elected officials did their jobs and more. So the monuments being in that space where they were in the site of a former slave auction block was not an appropriate place, and I really felt that it was if we could have been successful, it would have been a way to allow folks to really feel hope when there's such a time of hopelessness.
In this quiet, respectful place, those who want to visit the statues will see them in a setting that offers opportunities to learn more about Lexington history. Both men are buried at the cemetery, along with many others who served in the Confederate Army. The cemetery is also home to Union soldiers. Like the entire state of Kentucky, Lexington's loyalties were divided in the Civil War. The courthouse is a little world within itself, with almost every convenience within its walls, except a restaurant. So wrote the Sunday Lexington Leader on February 4, 1900, as it introduced the community to its new courthouse. Now, as we rededicate the building in 2018, there are no courts inside, but there is a restaurant, a bourbon bar, a public event space, a visitor center, and offices. The restoration of the courthouse is a public-private partnership. The ongoing cost of the operation of the building will be funded through the rents paid by tenants. The Rotunda, Limestone Hall, is leased to Lex Effect, an event management company. Demand for the space has been through the roof since the company began booking events in February 2018. With local tourism booming, the new visitor center is tech-savvy with interactive exhibits. There's also a place to smell the bourbon from nearby distilleries. Visit Lex, which operates the visitor center, also has its offices inside the courthouse, as does the Breeders' Cup. The success of the 2015 Breeders' Cup, which Lexington hosted, prompted the organization to move its headquarters from the Lexington suburbs to the center of downtown. The restaurant, Zim's Cafe, and the bar, the Thirsty Fox at Zim's Cafe, are both owned and operated by outstanding restaurateur Wiedemann, the leader of farm-to-table dining in the Bluegrass.
I grew up in Lexington, and this building to me was always the center of our community. It was where I felt like all kinds of mysteries were resolved and happening, and it was sort of the square, the center square of town. Then the farmers market moved here, so I was just thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to open a restaurant in such an iconic location. Looking at the courthouse and its restaurant potential before we made the decision to come to the courthouse, I felt like the farmers market associated with Cheapside right outside the doors of Zim's Cafe was one of the chief reasons I wanted to open the restaurant. And it's back to sort of this magic investment that the city first made when they first built this building, with the clock and the lights and the weather vane. And I think for Zim's Cafe to be a part of that, with its folk art and its color and its, local vegetables and local hamburgers and families and kids running around through this, is just the most amazing thing for Lexington, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
As we rededicate this historic courthouse, we welcome you to a grand public space that welcomes everyone and celebrates Lexington,
We have a ribbon
our great
around
American
the
city.
entire courthouse, and we are ready to cut the ribbon in 3, 2, 1.